Hi everyone.
Finally, we're live. Sorry, we were having some
Technical problems.
For whatever reason, it wasn't going online. So.
Yeah, so we're here. Sorry you had to wait for 10 minutes.
It's what it is. Put yourself there and lower the light a little. It's a little.
Yeah. You guys still see us? Okay. Very good. So we had only one question from our last vlog, which was about leading and following. And it was from Xenia, and it was about boleos and leading and following boleos. So what we wanted to say about that is that for us, everything that's led and followed is followed in the same way, meaning that there are principles of how you create energy and how you create directions, and then how you combine them. That's what makes movement. So boleos are not any different from just normal steps, back steps, side steps, forward steps, or quick steps. The only difference between a normal step, let's say, and a boleo or a gancho, or things that go up where the free leg lifts off the floor, in order for the free leg to lift, there has to be acceleration. So that's the only difference. So basically,
which requires more energy.
Yeah, which requires more energy.
So normally boleos actually, when you really lead and follow, at least how we think about it, they're actually pretty hard to lead and follow. So for example, sometimes you have, let's say in your first tango class, you have the cross. The cross actually, if you really think about it, it's really hard to lead and follow correctly. There are easier ways to get there, but let's say that already has like not only one direction, have many directions to be able to create the cross. So the boleo, let's say, is kind of like the same thing. It has a lot of different directions, and on top of it, it has more energy. So it requires a lot more work than what it looks like. So sometimes this is what we were saying, like doing boleos by yourself against the wall or with the bar is really nice, and it's a good exercise,
and it's good if the people who you're dancing with like mostly don't lead boleos, which is kind of what happens. And so for the follower, it's important if you can shape your leg, it's important that it looks good and that it feels good and that it's technically makes sense in your body what you're doing. So it's definitely valuable to practice it. But when you meet a leader who's actually leading the boleo and you do the boleo as you've practiced it, it might not be the same thing. So
because there are many different boleos. There is no like there are 4 boleos only. There are many,
or 4 types of boleos, right? There are basically, depending on how you combine different directions or different amounts of energy, you will have a completely different boleo. So each boleo should be different. If we are, let's say, in a milonga and I'm just looking at the floor and I'm looking at people dancing and I see somebody moving and they're constantly, like I see that they're moving the same way all the time, let's say they always do the same boleo, that for me is an indication either that the leader is not leading he's leaving it like an embellishment and the follower is doing the shape, or that the follower is not exactly following what the leader is leading. Because if we really lead and follow it, it should never really be the same. Anyway, so that's about leading and following. So today's topic, which we wanted to talk about is...
Which is obviously related to leading and following, but we're going to talk about it in a different way.
Or we're just going to talk about different things.
About it.
It has to do sort of about fallacies or misconceptions or ideas that are widespread, but we don't believe are necessarily true.
Can you put it a little bit this way? It bothers me, the light there.
But the light is behind my head, so you can't see it.
Yeah, but there is this light here. So I have to put myself here to cover the light.
So what we're going to talk about are the 4 or 5 different misconceptions that are pretty widespread that we don't really believe are how they're said to be. So the first misconception or fallacy that we wanted to talk about was the idea of frontality. I think that's a pretty widespread idea in Argentina Tango.
Yeah, there is this idea that you're supposed to remain in front of each other as much as you can.
So that would mean that like the shoulders to shoulders, and a lot of what happens with frontality is that people tend to either look at the chest of the leader, or if the leader is moving his upper body, the follower is going to try to match that movement and move around the leader in that way. But there are a lot of times where the upper bodies don't stay square to each other and actually can't stay square in the movement. That's the first thing. The second thing is that a lot of the time, the movement of the upper body, which tracks the leader, and the movement of the legs of the follower won't be the same. So if I am paying attention to how my leader is rotating, I actually don't know if my legs are doing a forward step or a back step or a side step. Yeah, what he's doing up here has nothing to do with what my legs are doing down there. That's the second thing. And the third thing has to do with creating a connection. So sometimes there's an idea that in order to have connection, you have to have frontality, but you can have connection without having frontality so long as you have energy connection through the floor and through your body. So that's kind of the first thing that we really want to talk about, because if you take the idea of frontality for granted, you limit the scope of possibilities in the dance. And you sometimes will follow or move in a way that actually is not what's really happening through the energy and through the lead. Do you want to show them some movements that are like that?
That they don't have frontality?
Yeah. So we're since this is like show and tell, we're gonna show you guys some stuff too. So you're gonna see some of it. So I don't know if you can see us.
You will in a second when we
I think we can lift this a little more.
That's good.
Sorry, this is the first time we're doing it like this, so we're still like understanding the parameters.
It's not true. It's not the first time. It's the second time.
Okay. There you go.
There you go. And Jesse's there.
Jesse's there too.
Good.
Okay.
So a movement that doesn't have to necessarily frontality.
Yeah.
So for example, many people start in the turn. Let's say we take a side step, right? And I have to start into the turn. For us, the most correct one is like I have to turn towards her, right? So then from here we start into the turn, so into the same to the sagada, right? But let's say this is also eventually possible. See? Let me do it in front of the mirror. Is that what you want to do?
I don't know. You have a frontality. Show me what's the frontality.
So frontality, if I need to. And also, I don't have to have frontality. We could do this, which causes something different, a different effect. Yes?
Another possibility of frontality is that we don't actually have to be relating forward to move. So we can have, for example, this position.
Yes, you see we're now in front of each other. Look at it here. This would be a back sagada, let's say. We have no frontality at all. Or let's say she could be doing the same thing to do sagada to me. Have no frontality.
What else?
You, the funny one, I walk backward when she's going backward. So this, it has no frontality.
And a lot of times, like, old-fashioned Tango dancing.
You have to talk more there. See, I think
Can you hear us, guys?
Can you hear the little thing? You see the little thing? There, see as they can.
Yeah, I think you can hear us. The other one that's a good example is like Tango al revés. This is really old-fashioned. People don't really do that anymore, and it's kind of choreographic. But if we understand how to create movement towards each other and how to create connection, then it doesn't matter if we're facing this way or if we're facing this way. So even in this position, we should still be able to lead and follow.
Yeah, but this is really hard.
This is really, really hard. I could show them like one step.
But we don't do this either.
I know, but it doesn't matter.
What do you mean it doesn't matter? Yes, you can, but
yeah. So for
choreographically,
it's not necessarily choreographic. It can also be a part of the lead and follow.
it's just harder, way harder.
Okay. So that's kind of about frontality. The second thing, do you guys have any questions about that, by the way? I know that some of you are with us, so if you want, you can write us on a chat message and we'll try to address your question.
Yeah, in this one I'm following Sarah, so I don't know where she's going, so.
Oh, come on,
Well, I have an idea, but I'm not going for the same thing, so I don't want to interrupt you. Okay.
You don't want to interfere?
No.
Okay, good. The second thing that is kind of related to frontality has to do with the embrace. And there are a lot of ideas about the position of the embrace and that the embrace is like a fixed thing, that it's like, and everybody has their own preference. So that's what most people tend to teach, is kind of like how they embrace. You know, whether the arm is here, or this is like this, or like this, or like this, or none of those things are actually so important, because the shape of the embrace is kind of a personal thing. And why do we need to talk about this, and why do we need to think about it? Because what is the purpose of the embrace? The purpose of the embrace is to transmit information. So long as it serves its function, how you want to embrace is then a question of, first of all, your physical body. Like, there are people who have, closed shoulders. They can't do this. And if they try to do this, everything will crumple like that. So this is a physical limitation that my embrace can't, like for Ivan, like he wouldn't be able to put his arm up here. So that's the first limitation, is kind of like your physical position. And the second limitation, or the second choice, is visual. What do you want to show? This position is much stronger looking than this one. So depending on what it is that we're trying to express, this embrace can be different. There are really no rules about how it should be and how your hand should be and how this wrist should be, yeah? There are technical things that help you with the embrace, like how you hold your arms up, that you don't hold it from your traps, but from your back, that you use your lats, that you close your rib cage, all of these things that help us. But those are technical internal things. They're not external things. So besides this kind of capacity to change the embrace, we also have sometimes a need to do it, because there are certain positions that we can't get into as a couple if we don't allow a little bend in the elbow, or if we don't allow a bend in the other side of the elbow. And we see this in particular in rotational movements. So should we show them some?
Yes. So what do you want to show?
Something where we can maintain the embrace. It doesn't have to show the limbs. This is just everybody.
Not doing that doesn't include what?
That the arms can be flexible.
That
they have to be flexible, otherwise we won't be able to get into it.
For example, a lot of the times, for us to do, let's say, back sacada, on this side of the embrace, most of us will try on this side of the embrace. Right? Let me try in a harder position so it makes even more sense. This. Most of us will do this. See our arms? Yes? But somehow, we don't believe that going to the other side is an option. And it should be an option. If I'm here, I should be able to do the same thing to enter there. Yes, it's harder on this side, obviously, right? But only gets harder if we think as embrace as a strength. It could look like that, like it's staying in the same place, and we are always trying to keep it as elegant as possible. But in the moment that I need to let it flexible, I have to let it bend. Yes, so the embrace could look like it's running.
Or it could look more fixed, more stable.
More fixed, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't move. It has to give, because technically, all of us, and I don't think anybody is perfectly correct all the time. So a lot of the embrace given, it gives us those spaces that sometimes we don't do on our lower body, meaning that if I
or that are physically impossible. I mean, the reason why on that side you have to bend the arm is because the legs are just too far away from each other. You wouldn't be able to get into that sacada. So and we can't rotate more than that. Our spines have a restriction. So the only way to be able to create that movement is to actually allow the embrace to bend the same way that it bends on the other side, and we just don't ever think about it. So that's sort of the second assumption about this immutable fixed embrace, which isn't really true, because the embrace moves all the time.
Yes. Talking about that idea about the embrace, again, we keep saying embrace, but then what happens a lot of the times is a lot of ideas of like the embrace, like I said before, you have to like have a frame. The problem of having the idea of just saying that has a frame is something that is fixed. And on the moment that, again, we have the idea that is fixed, then that means that sometimes we use it almost like a ballet bar also. We start thinking that the embrace, it becomes something that we use it as a tool to move and not as a tool to be able to feel what's happening in the rest of the body.
So it's a pretty interesting thing when you start to understand how your movement works from your legs, and how you understand how movement in general works with your partner. You start to notice when your embrace gets heavier, and usually those moments of heavier embrace means that there's some technical problem or some imbalance with where our legs are positioned or how it is that we're interacting with each other. So some problem in the body mechanic or in our geometry. And the embrace is a great way to discover where you have problems, because in a way you should be always able to keep it an embrace, a soft, connected thing, instead of like using it for backwards.
So let's find an example. Let's do something wrong, right? And if our embrace is not flexible, it wouldn't allow us to do it.
Well, we just showed them that.
Which one?
The back sacada. So I think the embrace is done. I think we should move on to the next thing, because we don't want to kill people.
Okay.
They can ask us questions. We'll be happy to go over this stuff more, but we also don't want to like take an hour, because somebody told us use 20 minutes, an hour is too long to concentrate. So anyway, so this is the second thing, the embrace. The third thing that we wanted to talk about is this idea of momentum as the source of energy. And momentum can be a source of energy in some instances. So, for example, we can create a lot of energy in the first step of a movement, and then sort of use it to move until we run out of energy. So we'll show you like a good use of momentum.
Look. That's easy.
So this is a good use of momentum.
What do you want?
So if you look at where this energy is generated and how we're using it, it's generated here, here. We're preparing it, we're creating a lot of it, and then we're going to just use it for the rest of the steps, and when we run out, which we ran off screen, we kind of stop. So that is momentum. It's true. We're using the momentum of the initial preparation of that kind of back step for me to make the next three steps. And that's exactly what it looks like. Yeah. But there are a lot of other ways that we use energy that are more useful for different kinds of things. So momentum, for example, is particularly unuseful if you want to turn around your own axis. So maybe if I'm by myself, just me, it's true, I can use my upper body. I use a little bit of energy in my upper body, and then I swing my hips behind. I use a little bit of energy in my upper body, and then I use my hips behind. That's okay if I'm by myself, but even there, it's a little bit out of control, because I'm just kind of like pulling my lower body.
Yeah, maybe if you practice it a lot, eventually work, but right away as a efficient thing, it won't be.
Yeah, it's kind of like a simple way to do it, but it's not a long-term good way to do it. And it's certainly not a good way to do it if you are next to a partner, if you're attached to a partner. So if this is really true, that Ivan uses the momentum of his upper body swinging to bring his hips around, I'm attached to him. So the moment that he accelerates his upper body,
say when I do an enrollment, if I accelerate, right, because I want to create that momentum,
he's also accelerating me. So in that moment of acceleration, I am also speeding up.
What that means that somebody's pulling somebody.
Yeah. So that's it's okay if that's how you want to do your dance, but there are problems with that. The first one is that a lot of the time, if you accelerate the follower, then there are some places that you can. There's some things you can't do. For example, if you accelerate the follower by using your upper body to swing your legs, and you're trying to do like a sacada, the follower will be out of the way. She will already have moved into the next step. You will not have the time to enter into sacada. That's the first problem. The second problem would be with control. So if you're using momentum of the pulling of the upper body to swing your hips around, you may be able to execute a movement, but you certainly don't control it. You can't slow it down. So if you think that momentum is what gives energy for your lower body, you can't do this, for example. Slow.
Do that with energy. Oh. That to go slow.
So in these kinds of things, usually the energy which we're using to create those kinds of movements have to do with how our upper bodies and lower bodies are working together and how we're using the ground. And actually, most of the time in these movements, it's never really the upper body that's moving first.
And it's not her upper body helping me to do it. And I'm not saying that she's not nice and she doesn't help me, but this is not really what's happening. This is another idea. Let's say for some people, we have a strong embrace here, and then when you go around, you know that you're supposed to take it.
So here I'm kind of carrying him.
So this is nice. Oh yes, I can say whatever. Beautiful, keep going, Tara. Keep going, I'm not done. You see, the music is not done yet, so keep going, keep going. Yeah, I stay forever. That will be really nice if I'm doing a show and I want to show something choreographically, and then it's cool.
So if we know exactly how many steps I do at what speed, then me pulling him around is okay. But if we're social dancing and we're doing these more complex things,
how does she know when you're done with your movement? How does she know how many steps she's doing? How does she know
the size of the step?
The size of the step. How does she know the speed of the steps? How does she know if she's only going backwards, she's only going sideways, she's only going forward?
The shape of the movement.
The shape of the movement. So all of that we still have to lead. And how does she know that maybe in between that I want to accelerate or I want to slow down? I have to be able to change that whenever I want. So if I had it, let's say here, this is the rosket, right? And I have to be able to accelerate or to slow down afterwards, or I want to accelerate here and then slow down here. So I have to be able to control it whenever I want to control it.
So actually the generation of energy for your individual movement is super connected to the lead. So how you create movement for your energy for your own movement, it also has to do with what you're leading. So if you're thinking that you're going to lead from momentum, especially momentum in rotations that happens by pulling by swinging your upper body and then pulling the hips behind, that means that actually you're not actually leading the legs of the follower. You're only leading the axis movement, which is really imprecise. And if you only lead the axis movement, it's super hard to distinguish between whether you're leading a forward step for the follower, a side step, or a back step for the follower.
So, for example, normally this in the turn, sometimes she enters into a forward step, right? And after a forward step, what normally she does? A side step, and after the side step, what normally she does? Back, and after that, side, and then forward step over again. But again, it doesn't have to be like that. If I don't have to lead any step on any direction, right? Meaning if I just know how to affect her axis,
or affect the legs,
or affect her legs, more importantly, yes, I could choose the forward and keep creating forward for her. And I can always change it to go for her to go back, or to come back forward, side, back, side, whatever it is that I need. So you have to, again, it's kind of funny, but it's like, if you know how to lead, you really understand the idea of leading and following, then this is not a question, right? If we tell her to go backwards or to her only to go forward, to only do the turn, normal turn, or to be able to create that now we say we did 1, 2, 3, 4, and then she arrives there. I know, because I don't like your topics. Or I should be able to modify it for her. See, now I did smaller steps for her. Or I turn more, depending on what we need.
So from the previous thing that we had talked about, the lead for me is linked to energy creation for him. It's also linked to energy creation for me. So anything that you want to do in terms of being able to create power or acceleration or energy, it has to be connected to what you're doing with your partner. And if you're only using momentum, that means that the indications that you're giving or the instructions that you're giving as a leader are very imprecise. They're very, very general. So you're not actually able to affect each of her legs, meaning that you can just, in general, tell her where to step and not specifically. And that in Tango is a really big problem, because for us, 2 centimeters off of the access point geometrically creates problems for the embrace. So that was the third issue, in using momentum as energy. The fourth issue is kind of what Ivan already started to talk about, and that is this perception or this idea that there are some movements that are more natural than other movements. And that has to do kind of with, and why is this problematic? This is problematic because then we start to go into this idea of percentages. Like, if I do this, 90% of the followers will follow it. And if I do it this way, then only 50% of followers will follow it. So there's some idea.
A percentage.
There's some idea of percentage, and that kind of brings us into like only doing movements that are successful.
Percentage.
But they are successful because the geometry of the movement inherently already kind of creates the lead. And so that means that we narrow the number or the types of steps or what kind of movements we do, the options into patterns that where geometry itself helps us to do it. So an example of this is something like the basic in the cross. I'm going outside partner. So when you are
regular basic. Yeah. Go ahead.
So when you go outside partner position and you want to stay outside partner, you have to keep on sending energy to each of the followers' legs so that they keep maintaining their line of movement.
Meaning that we should be able to do this, right? If we want.
We should be able to walk outside partner indefinitely.
Yeah.
So what happened at some point, and I think this is kind of like
when things started,
an unconscious development, that when we went outside partner for this first step worked. there was enough energy for the left leg to keep going in a line.
Now, this leg is farther from her standing leg, so for sure, they start creating less energy for the body here, and they still move, so she feels still a little bit.
But now, in this next step, if my partner doesn't send energy diagonally towards me,
for her to keep moving
this
in that
way,
direction,
but he only moves straight in a line,
so I go completely straight.
That will make my axis shift towards the front of my axis of my right leg, and I cross kind of by default.
So kind of like by consequence, by default, by the geometry that we're doing without really thinking about how we lead in each leg, meaning the movement is helping us to get there. Right? So I do the movement, and then somehow, because I'm just doing the movement in a particular geometry, it forces the follower to do what you have to do.
The even more clear example of this is like the original type of basic that people used to do with the back cross for the leader.
So they used to do more round. We're just gonna do just thinking about the cross like that. But a lot of the time, people also used to cross themselves.
So this type of lead for the cross is almost 100% lead, because by taking a back diagonal, a forward diagonal, the leader is creating a back diagonal for the follower, and she's automatically going there because that's how her weight is shifting on her axis. So that would be like 100% lead. But it's really, people don't really understand what they're doing. They don't understand why this works.
Like for example, back then, because I mean, we're pretty young compared to the back then time, but it's still some of our teachers or some people still teach like that. Their explanation, it will be like, they will give you a step, and on that step, make that correction that they tell you, like, no, here, don't step here, step there. So for example, this step, all step. So they do 1, 2, right? Let me show it again. I can get out of the, I'm gonna go slowly. 1, 2, yes? So the correction it will be, do not step here and try to step here. So then she step with you short, right? I mean, they wouldn't explain that, but they would say step here. So I mean, it works better when you step here, when you step to her foot, right? And if you didn't do that, obviously, then you got it this. And then she's too far, so when you have to go for the next step, then you follow.
So these kinds of steps are really great because you don't need to understand a lot of things. You don't need to know how to transmit information to your partner so much, because just by doing the movement, you are able to get the result which you're looking for. But if you understand how the movement works from underneath, then
where you step,
then that
really
kind of gets divorced. Like it stops being binary in the sense that like he does this, therefore I do this other thing, and the world opens. Because even for something like the basic, it's completely possible for Ivan to do his basic steps and lead from me something completely different. So,
right, so yes, it would be nice if we step. If I step on the places that we normally do, for her to do her movement, so then the geometry creates that, but I don't have to do that. I could literally change my movement. Yes, and whoa, out of the camera, one more time. Let's say what I do. This, that. And here normally, let's say it makes sense that I do this, but I don't have to. Yes, I could go to a completely different place where she's going. And like that, a billion of different options.
So that would be him changing his movement. So now let's do the other thing that I said, which is you changing my movement.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So it would be possible for Ivan to do his movement the same and completely leave me in something different.
So instead of doing the first step the same and the second one the same, I keep the same, but I change for her the movement. Okay? Yeah? And do I still have to lead you across?
Yeah.
Yes? Okay, let's take the other side. Yeah? Let's do that again. People can see it. I really don't know what I did though.
I don't know.
This.
I think it was a photo.
It was Forward for you. So see, for me, it's still the same. Side and forward. Now one more. Did I do this?
Mm-hmm.
No.
No.
See?
I don't remember.
That's the thing. You can do anything. Okay,
Just do anything, doesn't matter.
Oh, okay. Da. Very good. And now I need to cross. Okay, cross the other side.
Yeah, so that is a different way of thinking about it. That means that that everything is potentially natural. There's not like there are not more natural movements or less natural movements, because if you understand how they work from underneath, then any movement can be natural because it just feels just as good.
Meaning if you know how to create them, then...
Yeah. So an example of what Ivan was giving you guys before when he was doing the turn, all different kinds of turns, there's this idea that the turn has a natural timing, which is if the follower starts in a forward step, it's 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So it looks like this.
You want to do that around the thing?
Yeah.
Do it around me?
Yeah.
So the normal thing...
An assumption is that this would be, let's say, a normal turn timing. The case, the reason why this sometimes happens is because if we don't understand that the back step is, that we can't put our heel down on the back step, then we're not controlling that back step, then yes, we have to accelerate it, because otherwise we would get too far away from our partner. So that change in timing, what it's doing is just making sure that we can actually keep circling around our partner. But if you understand how to work with your body, then you don't need to accelerate it. You can do that turn kind of in any timing that you want, in any length that you want, in any orientation that you want, and so on. So these are the 4 things that we kind of wanted to talk about. And just to recap them again, it's the frontality, the embrace immobility, or
they should be flexible.
Like
they shouldn't be just stiff.
Yeah, so I'm talking about the fallacies and
the fallacies.
Yeah. Then it's using momentum for energy, and the last one is that there's a natural steps. So I hope that maybe
make you think a little bit about it.
Try to recognize some of these things in your own dancing, and try to maybe see if there are other ways that you can do things, because I think the more options we have, the more interesting life is. So please ask us. We'll sit around for the next 10 minutes here.
Before the battery
of the computer dies. And if you make a text comment in the feed, we'll be happy to answer it
right now.
So
I'm gonna go get water.
Yeah, so while we're waiting for comments, if anybody's brave enough to make one, I will talk about my banana bread that I made today, which was a little on the dry side. I don't know why. It's banana bread. It should be moist and delicious, but it didn't turn out that way. I think I need less flour or more butter or something. So waiting for your comments, waiting for your questions. No. Ivan is mad at me because he wanted to make tortitas today, and I got too much bread, and then I got flour to make banana bread. So he's not very happy. Oh, it's okay. I'll have some later. See, that's the banana bread. Doesn't look bad. It asked for sugar, and I put in coconut sugar.
It's really yummy.
Yeah, it's pretty tasty. It's just not so like, it should be really moist. I think I put too much flour in. But we'll see.
Again, the idea of these videos is not to create. ¿Cómo se dice?
Why are you even talking about that?
Because I want to talk about it, even if you don't agree. I should be able to express myself however I want. Because sometimes a lot of people do videos just trying to create, how do you say, like,
I think people are too scared to say anything that goes against the mainstream. And
I don't think so.
I think there
are
are.
some people that are really good and they don't mind speaking their mind. They're actually really careful. Sometimes we don't want to. I don't want to, at least. And I want to be able to say some things, but sometimes you can't.
I just think you should be honest about what you believe and have beliefs that you can support with information, and you should be open to criticism and open to questions, because that's the only way to learn. Actually, for us, it's super important that our students were our biggest teachers, because when we started to teach, we were just like little babies, and we were trying to pass information on that our great teachers gave us, and we tried to, of course, make it our own, and we tried to do our best that we could. And a lot of the time, people would come up with unexpected questions, or questions that we weren't asking our teachers, that we had never gotten an answer for.
And actually, because of one of our students, it's a German guy, we still remember Konstantin. The whole idea about the upper body leading, it literally went out of the window. We're just like, it's not possible.
So some of the best ideas that we've had have actually been in response to people asking us questions or pointing out inconsistencies in the things that we were saying. And to this day, we really appreciate it, and we always are very happy to get a comment or a constructive criticism, or somebody point out a hole in something that we're saying, because it actually makes us better, makes us work harder, and it makes us understand things better. So anyway, okay, so I see nobody's gonna ask us anything. Fine.
It's okay. We can go eat more of that cake.
We're gonna go eat some banana bread and watch the rest of Altered Carbon.
Really good show.
It's really dangerous though, because once you start watching it,
you can't stop. Yes. So have you any ideas of what you want to keep talking the next?
Oh yeah, and please, for the next vlog, we're gonna do it next week.
What? Marco?
Movements where actions of both and the couple are more similar are easier, so that there's not that much separate leading. Do you recommend that people start learning the hard way? No, we don't recommend that people start learning the hard way.
No.
We recommend that the way that people should start is to understand how axis shifts, simultaneous axis shifts, how they work. So if you can't generate power without moving your axis, none of those movements you should be teaching.
So for example, when people teach to say the cross, because it's a movement that we all do, in the beginning it's always easier because you don't have power to create this yet.
You don't have the capacity to create separate directions for the movement of the leader and for the movement of the follower.
Sometimes you have even no
awareness
of where her legs are. It's easier that you cross yourself with your whole body. That means that you move your whole body. Not that you just cross the leg. If you just cross the leg,
nothing will happen.
Nothing happens. But if I move my whole body into that direction, it causes that for her. So in the beginning, this is kind of what you want to do. You want to move your whole axis, and because of your whole axis moving in different directions, or particular directions, it causes the follower to go.
So this is really useful, because that gives people the sensation of axis, and it makes them aware of their partner's axis. And that's kind of like the first awareness that people should have. Then after that, they can become more specific in their awareness, and they can start paying attention to both legs. But that is not in the beginning. So whatever things, at least like in our opinion, whatever things you are going to be teaching basic beginners, they have to be things where the follower does not have to memorize the pattern. Because memorizing the pattern leads us into all kinds of troubles later on.
But in the beginning, they don't seem like harmful, but on the end, then what's going to happen is that person is going to hit the wall and won't be able to see any door. So what they have to do, they have to come back all the way to the beginning to try to
scrap all of that out of their brain and kind of start all over again. Yeah. So I guess if you mean start learning the hard way, if that means like not memorizing stuff and understanding axis movement and understanding the sensation of energy and articulation of the ankles and all those things that we talk about, then yes, that's the way to do it. Memorizing a pattern is not the way to do it. So we would never teach, at least for the first 6 months, a basic step where the leader puts their legs together.
And if you ever do something about memorizing, it's because you're working on something else.
Yeah. You're working on timing, or you're working on things that are not related to leading and following.
Yes. Anything else?
Anything else? Thank you for the question, Marco.
Yes. Oh, I just realized I have that.
Yeah. Oh, and by the way, we're going to be, now we're working on our other project, which is teacher trainings. So hopefully by the end of this quarantine,
we'll have it ready.
We'll have the program ready, and we're really excited about it. So hopefully we'll start those trainings towards the end of this year. So if anybody's interested, let us know.
Yeah. Also, we are going to start while quarantine our online classes, right? Oh, we have some more questions. Explain how you understand of the dance lead and follow has changed from when you were a beginner where you are today. Any milestone you found you wish knew earlier? It's just maybe how things used to be back then, at least the way we understood it. I don't know if it's exactly how we will explain it, but that's how we understood it. It was a little more rough, but the understanding before, it was like you have to make her do everything.
You have to lead everything.
I have to lead everything, literally. But it doesn't. Some people still sometimes say, "It's like, yeah, I understand." It's like, no, literally, I have to move her foot to any little centimeter of the floor to literally make any shape. But I used to have to do it in a really physical way. I really have to move her on top of it. So it was like dancing for two people. Now we are in a place that my job is not to move the follower. And for me, it was a big thing to understand. If in the beginning, it was a good thing that we understood this, but also if I wouldn't understand it from the beginning that my own movement, it was my lead, maybe things would be easier. But at the same time, maybe it was necessary that we learn this way. So I wouldn't know.
Yeah, because maybe we wouldn't understand it that way now.
Right.
Because how we teach now, no one taught us that way.
Yes. It's a combination of different people, and then us exploring and teaching a lot, and a lot of our students giving us a lot of questions that were really hard, like we were saying earlier, like the idea that the upper body wasn't really leading, because we used to at least say, oh, the upper body creates a preparation for you to do this. But then we realized the upper body, sometimes it will stay here, and then the legs will go completely in a different direction, and then it's like, so how I'm leading that? My upper body is not even rotating. So, yeah, I mean, like, I guess sometimes in the beginning it's necessary through everything that you're going through. All that I think that maybe it could be just an advice is that in the beginning, the one thing that it came up from Sarah, that for me, but then it helped both of us, obviously, it was instead of trying to find what was the different on all the techniques or all the different, couples or teachers, it was to focus more on what was the same. And that, I think, it make us really like progress really quick, because we start to like eliminate things that they were kind of like noise that was not important, because it had all these people explaining, oh, when I'm going to take a forward step, I breathe, and they do. And then they step, okay. And some other guys like, no, I don't breathe. I just move my arms backwards and then I go, okay. And then the other guy's like, no, I move my axis. No, I move my chest. I move my hips.
We're gonna move that one because we're gonna run out of battery.
Yes.
Sorry, guys. We need to move you because we're about to run out of battery.
So regardless what all of them they were saying somehow, it's not connected. They were saying somehow to do something different. For us, we were like, okay, wait. Let me look at you to see what you do. Let me feel what you do and to see if it makes sense to what you're saying. If those three things go together, okay, I keep going. If I will still not like question you, but question like how we're understanding things.
Yeah, because there are a lot of things that correlate but don't necessarily causate. So they're correlations, but they're not causations. And separating kind of like what went with something and what really was the cause of something, that took a lot of work.
Yeah, this happens a lot of the thing with the idea of the upper body. Yes, there is a lot of movements that when I rotate my upper body this way, my follower is also going there, right? But this is because of something that we have here, that is the embrace, and more likely a lot of the time we're trying to match this with each other.
So it's not that the follower goes because the embrace goes there. The embrace goes there because the follower is going there.
It's going there. That's the difference. So again, it kind of, in the beginning, for people, it makes sense that, because I do this, the follower goes there. So then we start thinking that my upper body is causing that. And then over time, we start to realize that there's a lot of movements, trust me, that most of us do, all of us do, that the upper body either is not moving at all or is moving on the opposite direction of it. So then, to be aware of stuff like that, it's like, what's causing is not really what's really happening.
Justin, I know your question is for Ivan and not for me, but I think there's some important things about leading and following. I think the most important thing is to, from the beginning, start to feel the other person. I think that's really underemphasized. The earlier you can feel the other person, you feel where they are, what they're on, what part of their foot they're on, the more you can feel them, the better you'll be able to lead. And for followers is to be active, not to be passive. Oh, okay. It's to be active. And I think sometimes being passive for followers at the beginning, being heavy, is so that leaders can feel them better. They can feel that there's mass that they're pushing.
Well, feel them, they can move them better.
But in the long term, actually being able to put in 100% for both. And like being like one machine with 4 legs that has the same energy levels. And then having the captain, which for us is Ivan, he's the captain of the ship, like kind of talking, like giving instructions. That makes a couple much stronger. So the stronger we are independently and the more we are the same in how we move, the more things that we can do. So I think those are probably as beginners, the things that I wish we had known better.
But sometimes some things, they're necessary to happen in a particular way. So
yeah, I mean, luckily for us, we had a good.
We had a really good beginner.
We had a good.
The path was really good.
Yeah.
So we cannot complain. We were extremely lucky.
Yeah. So hopefully now with these teacher trainings that we're creating and sort of the syllabus and how we teach our students, we've noticed that at least for us in terms of information transfer, when we have regular students, that it takes about 6 months for a follower to become advanced and about 2.5 years for a leader to become advanced. So that makes me very happy because that means that we're able to, that the ordering of information that we're giving is good. And I think order of information is probably the most important thing. It's like you're building a house. You don't want to have a roof before you have the foundation. So everything, it has to have a certain
order,
time that you learn it or that it's introduced to you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, everybody.
I hope we could answer the question.
Yeah, I hope we answered all your questions. We're gonna stay around for 5 more minutes, so feel free to ask us something else.
Yeah. And like we were saying before with this, we're really lucky because imagine our first teachers, they were students of some of the first teachers ever. They say that back then, when like long time ago, when Tango started and all of that, there were 5 teachers. Maybe they're more.
Or the people who survived
Yes, that's what I want
the
to say.
destruction of tango during the 60s, 70s in Argentina. We were lucky enough to learn from people who were sort of first generation learners from people back in the 50s. And
yeah, so imagine there were like 5 teachers at the time. It was Antonio Todaro, Balmaceda, Pupi Castello, was it? And Mingo Pugliese. Well, these teachers, some of the students, they were our teachers, that they learned directly from there. And one of them, for example, they learned, the first one learned mostly from Todaro and many other guys, obviously. And then the second teacher that we have is the son of Mingo Pugliese, of one of those teachers, which is also trained on other things. So we were extremely, extremely lucky. And also, we were also really stubborn. In the sense that the questions couldn't be like, oh, when I do this back sacal, I pull with this arm. But when I do this back boleo, I push with this arm. And it's like, but it's pretty much almost the same movement. Why you do 2 different things? That will be the question. So then it will create the whole problem, but a discussion, and it will help us to understand things better.
Okay. Hi, guys. We're both listening. Yay. Hilal is wondering why the musicality in the old Milonguero videos is so different from the new generation dancers. That's a really good question.
That's a really good question. Well, for the people that we remember that we have taken classes, and some of them were kind of from back then or not really sure, whatever, and then from what we have from our teachers, the idea of connection and musicality did not exist. Nobody will talk about it.
Yeah, actually, we've never really had a class, and we asked our teachers if in their classes musicality was ever discussed, and it just wasn't a thing. Like, it's kind of become a thing recently. Yes. So when you look at the musicality of the older guys who are dancing, it has to do with the musicality of the step. Mm-hmm. So the same way that we were talking about earlier about how certain movements have an inherent geometry, which kind of helps for the movement to happen. The same way, dynamically, some movements have inherent dynamics, which helps for the movement to happen. So before, like when we were studying also with the people from the previous generations, the class was literally like, you go there, and then they show you something, and then you do it. And if you can do it, they say, good, they give you something else. And if you can't do it, then they say, you need to practice more, come back next week. There was none of this technical explanation. This is why, Gustavo Naveira and that whole exploration club, when it formed, was such a revolutionary thing, because no one had ever thought about tango as like structure before. It was like, Tango Nuevo was like, oh my God, wow, we're deconstructing something. So there was no information.
Even though some people say that some of these teachers that I was mentioning, they did have it somehow structured. It just maybe wasn't.
It wasn't so broken down. So, yes. So also, like, if you had a really good teacher, the corrections were step here, not here.
Oh no! Don't do it like that. Do it better.
Yeah, and it was like it was according to the style. So in the style, like, to maintain the style, you step here and you don't step here. But also that stylistic correction was like a functional correction. And so all of this musicality, like the step has the music, yes. Not the music having the music. So the step has a certain timing. And the people who are very good and they dance traditional, you'll notice that they don't necessarily modify the timing of the step. The step will always be the same. They're just very good at putting it in the music.
So they know the music really, really well, that when the music is going to come, they prepare the movement and they put it perfectly in music. I mean, it is a pretty crazy skill.
And that's a really amazing skill. There are really great dancers who do this. There's also this idea that the step is kind of like the length of a phrase. Mm-hmm. So a lot of steps, old-fashioned steps, if you learn an old-fashioned step, it would be 8 counts. Right. And it was just enough, and they would all close. And so our teacher, when we first learned, when we didn't know how to organize songs, our teacher would be like, well, it's really simple. You do a basic, and then you do a figure. You do a basic, and then you do a figure. And it literally fit the phrases. So you put the basic in a phrase, and then you do a figure in a phrase.
Because he said that's how they used to do it. And if you look at many old videos, people used to do the basic first to kind of like to start, and then from there they start the sequence.
And also, this is also why a lot of the time the basic has a back step, right? Because if you don't include that back step, the back step and the basic makes it an 8 count. So being able to step back and then close, like it had an opening and a closing. Every step had an opening and a closing. So you had to start it and finish it.
Yeah, so it's really interesting, this whole thing about musicality. I think it's cool that now we can learn a little more about the music, so we can be better at it. But
especially since we understand kind of how to modify the movements, how to manipulate them.
Yes, but again, it's kind of like, at least for us, it's kind of like the cherry on top of the whole thing. Once that you already did all the cake, right? Then it's the last thing, on the sense that to be musical, then you have to be able to have control of your body. In
the way that we think about leading and following and improvising and creating and dancing. But if you think about the step being a thing that has a particular timing and a particular shape and a particular direction and space, then you don't think about the musicality that way. You think about, okay, which steps are appropriate for which sounds. So this is also why more old-fashioned teachers, they have different steps for waltz. There's different steps for milonga. There are different steps. There's this idea that you dance pugliese versus darienzo versus
with different steps.
Isarli with different steps, because your step has to be appropriate for the music, because the step is an entity.
Or back then, it was like some people that were experts at pugliese, expert at darienzo, expert at this. And it happens also because of preference. I mean, we prefer pugliese, but it doesn't mean that we cannot dance, let's say, darienzo or Isarli. But back then, it was more of a question of, let's say, the style that they had it,
or the steps which
or
you
the
created.
Steps that they had it, that they created, they fit better in the pugliese than, let's say, the darienzo. So then they, instead of modifying the movements to fit the whatever song that they were dancing or orchestra, they will just say, oh, well, I guess I'm better at pugliese, so I'll stick with this.
So one last anecdote to close. Recently, some years ago, we were in an Italian city where there was a milonga, where a very famous Argentine dancer was going to perform, and we were waiting there, for the performance. We were talking with our friends, and it was pugliese standard to start, and then the second time was pugliese, and the third, and the fifth, and seventh. Basically, the whole night
they were playing pugliese.
They were playing pugliese. Every single tanda, the milonga was pugliese.
And we love pugliese, but they were just like,
what is going on?
I mean,
this is not like normal. Really and then, because this particular dancer was very famous to be a pugliese dancer, because they did the milonga in his honor, they only played pugliese in the milonga. So, just an anecdote.
Yes.
Okay, everybody, thank you so much for listening and being with us. Thank you so much for your questions. We'll do another one next week. So
Tuesday, same
bat time, same bat channel. Anyway, it's an American thing. Okay.
Anyway, stay in touch. We're gonna start doing some classes online.
Yeah, well, we have to figure that out.
Yeah, so we'll send you some stuff. We'll post some stuff so you can check on our Facebook. What else?
That's it.
And that's it.
Thank you, everybody. Be safe. Take care. Have a full fridge. Hug your friends. Love, peace, and may this thing pass quickly.
Yes. Bye, guys.
Bye.